Hello, I'm Threads contributing editor Kenneth D. King. I want to introduce you to Lola the showgirl who has adventures and gets new fashions in my new book, Doll Couture. Lola, who happens to be an 11.5-inch fashion doll, is restarting her life in New York City, so she needs amazing outfits to match. Doll Couture walks through her story, where we meet the new friends she encounters along the way. These friends help her, and they make sure she has the fashion she needs for every situation. My book includes the patterns and instructions for each outfit, so you can create your own doll fashions, just like Lola's. Check out Doll Couture by Kenneth D. King at Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, TauntonStore.com, and all fine booksellers.
Welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast with the staff of Threads magazine. I'm your host, Carol Frazier, and my guest today is Brooks-Ann Camper. Brooks-Ann is a teacher who specializes in topics from the glories of hand sewing to an innovative way to fit the body you have, all based on her training and experience as a costume construction specialist. She has followed a somewhat unusual path to her current career as a teacher, and will be talking about how her background has motivated and prepared her for her teaching role. Welcome, Brooks-Ann.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for having me.
It's very nice to have you. I'm going to start out by saying that, unlike most of our listeners, you didn't start to sew by learning from a family member or in a class at school. Can you give us the story about how you got your start?
Yes, I have a pretty fun story of how I first learned to sew because, I didn't learn to sew as a kid or as a hobby or even as something that I was interested in. It was kind of a punishment. So I was in college. I was a senior in college, and I was a theater major at a really small school. And I was in a play. I didn't have any interest in costumes and never sewn anything before, but I was acting in a play, and I was backstage. And the director of the show, who was the head of the department, saw me, and my dress was all wrinkled, and he told me to go into the costume shop and iron my dress before I went back out on stage. And I told him that I didn't know how to use an iron, which I didn't. And so I think I thought that would get me out of the task, but that was not the case. He was like a really brilliant but kind of curmudgeonly guy, and he worked in the costume shop. He loved to sew. So not only was I, not going to iron my dress, he really wanted to teach me a thing or two. So that's what he did. So instead of so on the next show, instead of working in the scene shop, I really liked working with the power tools and that kind of stuff. He sort of sentenced me to work in the costume shop on the next show so that I would learn how to use an iron, because I was about to graduate and he didn't think that was very cool. And so anyway, as you can probably guess, I worked on this show. So it was Oliver. And so my job was to make all of the workhouse orphans clothes. So they were supposed to be ragtag and, not look good anyway. So if I didn't do a good job, it wasn't going to be a big deal. But so that was my assignment. And so I took my assignment, and lo and behold, I kind of loved it. And it was really fun. And then I was going to graduate. And so I had just sort of discovered this thing that I wanted to do. And but I was about to leave, and I didn't know what to do next. And so I'm a real nerdy academic person. And so I did want to continue doing school, but I didn't think I could get go to school for costuming. I had literally made one bunch of ragtag clothes. So I applied kind of as a joke to the Yale School of Drama, which is the #1 drama school in the country, for internship. There's a couple of paragraphs in the catalog. And so they only take one a year. And so they they called and wanted me to do an interview. And I was like, I'm not going to, they wanted me to fly up to Connecticut. I grew up in Texas and the school was in Louisiana. And, I wasn't going to fly to Connecticut to do this interview that I was not going to get. I was a poor college student. And so I just told him like, oh, I was too busy in the costume shop to make it to the interview, but that I could do a phone interview. Or actually, I don't know what I said, but lo and behold, I got the internship. So I immediately went from making some ragtag orphans to working on these like high-end productions where I was part of the staff. And so I learned like couture really quick. So basically some of my very first garments were custom, patterned for the individual, all, cut out of the finest silks using the best tools and all that. And I was just the beginner there pretending like I knew what I was doing until I knew what I was doing. And everybody sort of treated me like I fit in. And so so I learned to sew sort of in this way, this really immersive way where I learned sort of the hard way first. I had never sewn anything. And that was just an amazing experience. So I worked as a staff. And then the other half of the day, I got to take classes with the graduate students, any classes I want, because I wasn't working towards a degree. I was working towards a certificate. And so I got to take like graduate level Ivy League pattern making classes. And my design teacher was Jane Greenwood. She's won like 20 Tony Awards. Like that was my first sort of experience with sewing.
That's a complete fake it till you make it story. Yes. That's incredible. Or baptism by fire or whatever you want to call it. It is amazing. And it sounds fantastic. I don't think everybody could have lived up to that somehow because it probably was really challenging. But I would love to know a little bit about, did they teach you pattern making during those classes and draping and all that too, as well as construction?
Yes. So half I was the staff making the clothes for the different productions, and then half I was a student. And so when I was staff, I was mostly the stitcher. And so the stitcher is really the one who seams the things together. I wasn't drafting patterns. I was working, with the pattern makers who were on staff. I was just sort of the helper, but I got to be integrated into all of it and see how it all works. I did cutting. I did a lot of the extra tasks that weren't the pattern makers, but the classes I got to choose what I wanted to take. And what I was really interested in was the pattern making. And I really loved how it was all about the individual. Like it's not a fashion pattern making class. Like I didn't learn anything about grading or anything about, standardized sizes or any of that stuff. Like I was only learning to make patterns for specific individuals because actors come in all shapes and sizes, and the designer designs anything they want. They can just draw on a sketch and hand it to you. And so the designer's job is to sort of do the research and design the sketch and stuff. But I really fell in love with the construction side. Like I wanted to make the designer's sketch a reality. I loved the pattern making. I loved translating the sketch into the pattern. And so that's why when my 1 year of Yale was up, I still am this nerdy academic person. So I searched for an MFA program that focused on costume production instead of costume design. And there were only a few at the time. And one was UNC Chapel Hill. And I got a master's of fine art from UNC Chapel Hill in costume production. So that was my next step. So that's still just maybe 4 years in from absolute beginner, but then I literally am a master because I have a master's degree in it.
I find that it's such a great way to learn how to sew. It takes you away from all the barriers that a lot of home sewers have. For example, it sounds to me like, have you ever used a commercial pattern?
No, I've never used it. Well, I've never followed a commercial pattern, like actually used the pattern pieces and followed the directions. There is a place for, I don't do it very often, but for using a commercial pattern, but I love to use it like it's like a Cliff's Notes. So for my own wedding dress, I found a vintage pattern that I thought had really cool, construction details. And so I looked at the pattern pieces, but then I used my own tools to actually make the pattern. And, and I looked at the instructions and thought, okay, that's kind of cool. And then I used my own, I like to do it my own way. I like to start with the person instead of the garment. So I think that's the difference is like when you're making something custom, you're starting with either a custom dress form. So you've padded a form to exactly match the person. And then you literally use fabric to drape the shapes on there. So I love draping. Or you can use a custom block that is like a flat representation of that custom dress form. And you manipulate those to make the different patterns. And so in both of those cases, you're starting with the body and then designing from there rather than starting with the garment and then adjusting it to fit the body. So I've never used a commercial pattern for that sort of reason because I just can't. The sizing stuff is something I'm not really interested in.
Well, you and I were talking a few days ago, and you said that you are not that into numbers.
Yeah.
And that you've figured out ways to fit patterns or make patterns that fit without having to use a lot of numbers. That may resonate with some of the listeners who just aren't into measuring every single thing and adding on seam allowances and taking them off and cutting and slicing and sliding and overlapping and everything.
There you go. You're telling me exactly why I don't use commercial patterns because I get to skip all that. And like pattern making is kind of my favorite part. So I feel like I would be trading the things that I really love, the things that aren't very inspiring to me. Like I literally do not want to know if I have a fuller bust than someone else or if my shoulders are slopier than average. Like those are things that I don't know, but I don't have to like measure myself all the time. Like the fit is already taken care of and I can just play around with design. And then I'm not like a big designer. So like things I make are pretty simple if I'm making stuff for myself. And so, yeah, I don't want to, I don't even want to know if I'm short-waisted or that kind of thing.
I was speaking to some non-sewing women the other day, and they were saying something about, every time I try on a pair of pants, it's like, there's so much crotch length. I don't know what to do about this. What's the matter with me? Or, how come I, am this or that? And I can't get anything to fit. And I was so surprised because I think sewers really understand. It's hard to internalize, but we do understand that patterns are standardized and ready-to-wear clothing is standardized, and that therefore it won't work for anybody who's non-standard.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that these people were sort of still thinking, what's wrong with my body? Rather than, the clothes don't fit. It's just a mismatch between you and the way the clothes are. Nothing's wrong with you. The clothes just aren't made for you. And the idea of just starting off with something that actually is the size and shape you are is so freeing.
Yeah, that's why I love it so much. And then when I realized there's not really anybody doing that, like even when you look at like a custom, a pattern making book, like a pattern making book was originally designed for fashion students who were going to mass produce garments. And so you were never the intended audience, the person who's at home sewing for themselves. I love doing all those where you're going to connect point A with point B sort of drafting. I think it's kind of fun, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And I know what I'm doing. And so I wanted to figure out what are the logic behind all these numbers? Why would you say this is 7 inches from here for everyone? Because it can't be. I've known enough. I've worked with enough bodies to know that no two are alike. So it's to think of a human being standardized is just icky to me. And looking at a chart of numbers is something that just personally makes my head spin. And so, I'm not a math person or anything. The classes that I teach and, what I try to spread to the world and the way that I sew, I try to boil it down for only the people who are sewing only for themselves. Not that you couldn't adapt my techniques to then work for other individuals, but you're never going to start a fashion line this way. Like, I know nothing about grading. I know nothing about standardized sizing. It's irrelevant when you've got the one person right in front of you. And if you're someone who sews for yourself, and you're the designer and the wearer and the sewer, then you have so much more freedom than someone who has to learn all those formulas. And so once we can just sort of map your body, then you get to make all the decisions about your clothes. Like, it's not that it has to be form fitting because we've mapped your body. It's that you get to decide, I want it to be roomier here. I want it to be slopey here. Like, it just gives you the independence from the fashion industry and just the independence in your sewing. Like, you're not waiting for someone else to come up with something for you. You get to discover the answers. Like, it's kind of this holistic kind of, follow your curiosity. It's a little woo adjacent. We're going to get in a little bit different mindset, but I think it makes sewing so fun. And so I want to, sort of share that with whoever it will work for. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but just throwing out ideas because I think exploring different options is how you're going to learn what works for you. And sewing should be fun, all the little steps. So finding a way to enjoy the process is also part of all this.
I feel like also having some kind of sense of control over it because you're basing it on your own body and your own fit preferences and style preferences rather than looking at something that exists and you're trying to sort of bend it to your will somehow. You're just kind of starting from the beginning. But so what would be the first steps for one of your students, either a beginning sewer or somebody who has experience but is sort of not being satisfied with the results they get from buying a pattern, making adjustments, and then still not loving what they get? How do you get them started on this new path?
So the thing about my classes, so right now I teach a set of flat pattern making classes. So, I said that there's a draping version of it and there's a flat version of it. These are the flat version of it. They're very comprehensive, sort of college class, but for your hobby. So it has to be the person who is really like interested in like delving deep into all the little nerdy hows and whys of things, and someone who's not really all that interested in like speed being the huge motivator, because I would say enjoyability, yes, but efficiency, not so much. Like, I don't go for necessarily the speediest or the shortcut. I am teaching the long cut. Like, basically the way I learned, as I just sort of told it in the story, is that, just to sort of get past the really like hard stuff first, and then everything is easy. So like, instead of learning as a beginner, learning a shortcut and learning an easy project, what if you learned the hardest project? And then once you get through that, like, before you know it, you'll realize like, oh no, I'm in too deep. And then you get past it, like you work it out somehow. And then once you've got that behind you, like, everything is sort of easy. And so in my classes, I teach how to make the block. Not that the block is hard, but you are like mapping your body. So we're learning like exactly where your shaping is, and we can look and see like where your darts are and that kind of stuff to just map your body. And it doesn't include any standard measurements. It's only information from your body or your personal preferences. So it doesn't matter. Like, there's no like plus size. There's an even playing field. It's all about the one person's body being translated onto the paper. And so it's real nerdy, and I love it. And I think it's so fun. And so I offer these classes so that you can do that part with me. And so I can help you with that. And then I show you easy pattern making techniques. And then just like I can take a designer's sketch, and turn it into a reality and a pattern, you'll sort of learn how you can take an image or even a pattern and then make it actually fit you and your style. So I sort of take everybody through step by step by step by step. And a lot of it is that you're staying in the moment and not really thinking about the next step ahead. it's always going to be evolving and changing, like as you learn what the fabric wants to do. And so I sort of teach a little bit of a holistic approach to putting faith into the first step and then following that to the next and the next and the next. And you don't really know the ending until you get there. But that's also life. That's a good practice for what you're going to encounter in real life. Like there's never really a picture on an envelope that's going to tell you how it's going to turn out. So we might as well practice like things like patience and that kind of stuff while we're doing something that we love, which is sewing. And so, yeah, I hope more people give it a try.
I think it sounds great. And I think the idea of sort of like you understand the step you're doing right now and don't panic about what's about to come, because when you get there, you'll spend the time to understand that step and don't panic about the next one. And then you move along. That is a great life lesson. I think it's one that I need at the moment, but yeah, I feel like, people to sort of be able to take the deep breath and just say, I'm being led by somebody who knows what's going on here, which would be you, and I can make this work. So you do a skirt class. I think you do pants fitting. Do you do sort of a basic bodice fitting too?
Yes. So by the time you get through the series, you'll have all the blocks. And so, yeah, I just walk you through step by step, sort of on a need to know basis. And so that's why it actually works really great for beginners, because they don't have that unlearning part that everyone else who are more experienced have to go through. And so they can just joyfully be a beginner, and they usually whiz through the lessons much more easily than people who have a lot of experience. But that said, the real transformations that happen are from the people who say, I've been sewing for 50 years. I wish I would have learned this years ago. Like, this is really, works for me. I've, never been able to do anything like this before. And so those are the ones who stick through it and really find the success. And so people really love it. And I really love working with my students. And so that's where I could get to continue to learn and grow, or the people who like graciously interact with me in class. And so yeah, I'm happy to spread all I can.
You have a couple of interesting approaches to fitting. And one of them you said was to pad a dress form. And another one you mentioned to me was to use photographs to kind of understand your shape. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I think photographs has always been a big sewing tool of mine that I think people forget about. But making clothes is like making sculpture. And I don't think sculpture can happen from like number data alone. And so in making the dress form, so I have a ebook on how to pad a dress form as your body's able. And we use photos to help us very literally see like where our body differs from the dress form and exactly where to add padding. And it's very easy and it's exact. And the same thing in the flat pattern classes. Like, I think when you are trying to translate a 3D body into a 2D flat pattern piece, seeing the 2D photo is actually as helpful or even more helpful than fitting the 3D body in the mirror. Like, sometimes you just can't see. Seeing what you look like flattened is very helpful to figure out your flat pattern. Like, I can literally draw on your photo to say, your dart ends exactly here. This is going to be this wide. Here's what it's going to look like when you've reached the goal of it falling straight in line with gravity. So the way I teach fitting is less about like whether your booty is bigger than someone else's and doing a big old booty adjustment. Instead, you're trying to just work with the grain of the fabric and how it works with your body and gravity. And so we really build our clothes based off of the level of the floor, because gravity is always going to be what is affecting the fabric. So yeah, we get real nerdy. So if you like real nerdy sewing, Yeah, I hope you'll at least follow my blog or get on my newsletter or take classes with me because I think we could have a lot of fun together.
That sounds like a little bit nerdy, but not super nerdy. And it sounds like really good basic knowledge for somebody who wants to carry on making clothing. Like if you know about that, as you say, there's gravity pulling stuff down, everything's perpendicular to the floor. Your body is sort of in the way of the fabric falling, and you just need to move the fabric in such a way that it flows instead of gets caught or whatever the garment is supposed to do. Then you can sort of, as you say, holistically kind of view how this garment ought to be behaving and how it should perform when you wear it, which is useful information. And I feel like people who inherently are good at fitting, especially with an intuitive sense of it, sort of know those things. They may not be able to articulate them, but teaching that is probably very helpful for others who haven't really thought about that exactly.
Yeah.
So I know you do a lot of teaching online. Is this something that works okay when you're doing that, when you're doing sort of remote teaching or virtual teaching?
Yes, like I think it works better. Like I do teach one in-person class, which is a hand sewing class at Camp Workroom Social. But everything else I teach online. And I think it, like I said, with the flat pattern, especially, I think it works so much better online because it works better to work with photos than it does. Like you can do Zooms with me, make an appointment and we can do a Zoom fitting. But I find that like you sending me a photo and me drawing on it gets it quicker into the brain and helps me too, because I'm not really an off the cuff person. The other great thing about working virtually for this sort of thing is we are doing a lot of body mapping stuff. Like it's personal. And so in the online space, you get to work at your own pace and your own space. We don't have anything that is live at a specific time with a group. It's all in an ongoing classroom where you share photos, sort of like a Facebook group, but not on Facebook. Like it's just our own little community. And the only people in your community are the people that are in your class. So it's not like, your picture is going to be there for the people next year and next year. It's just for the people that are working through the lessons with you at that time. There's a lot of things you probably don't want to share, and you don't have to. And you can learn from other people who are willing to share, or you can, jump out of some of those hurdles too and like do something that you wouldn't normally do, post a picture of yourself and get over a lot of class. Basically, like I tell people, like skirt skills is not about skirts. Like there's, like we do make something, we make a garment by the end of class, but it's more about like a whole change of mindset and just a whole new way of looking at things. And so there's a lot of personal growth that happens in your skills, but also just like in your relationship to your body.
I think that's actually great. I mean, I feel like because I work for Threads, we've all seen each other in our underwear and in unitards and the whole thing. So yeah. you sort of get over all of that. But I don't know how I would feel, like in a big classroom somewhere. So having a small group where, you feel like you can trust the people you're with and everybody's there to support each other would really be good. And I think sewers really like to do that too.
Or it's just me and you. Like you can be totally private. Like the group is totally optional. You will not miss out on any of the lessons if you just work one-on-one with me. Lots of people go through the class and don't work with me at all. But, like I do offer that because it is a fitting class and it is about custom one of a kind, and everybody's body is custom one of a kind. So there's no way that I could make a pre-recorded video that is going to tell you exactly what you need, but I can tell you exactly what you need and we can talk about it and we can learn and we can, just open up some new possibilities. So we get through the block together, but then I didn't want to teach a block making class and then not tell you how to make patterns from it. And then I didn't want to teach a pattern making class and not to teach you how to make the garment from it. So in the class, we do the whole thing. I teach you through the whole custom process from before you know what you want to make all the way to wearing the thing. And so you get to go through all those processes together. And I think, a lot of times people think they're going to get one thing out of class and then they come out with something totally different. And different is beautiful. That's going to be part of what it is. Celebrate.
Exactly. You didn't learn to sew through following a pattern or the traditional way that people learn it from their teachers. So do you believe that you make the skirt more or less the same way anybody would who sort of comes at it from a more traditional way? Or do you have special skirt making technique secrets?
Well, nothing is specific to a garment. The reason why it starts with skirts is just because it's the easiest. You're getting through something, you're getting a quick win of making something, because you're going through the whole custom process. You're going to have to make that block before you can start making your pattern. You're going to have to make that pattern before you can start cutting your fabric. And yes, the way I sew, I have learned, is totally different from how someone who sews from home sewing pattern store or someone from a factory. So that is, I think, a big difference as well, is that the way I sew is more about that one step at a time. So I am always leaving everything adjustable and reversible for as long as possible until I know the answer of, so, and then I'll make something permanent. So I don't cut the same way. I don't sew the same way. So you will have to sort of relearn things that you've learned all of your life. But if you've been sewing for a long time, but then the beginners pick it up really easy, because just like I did, I think the way I sew is not harder. It's just different. And then I think in the end that, some people really do, grab onto my techniques and love to use them. And that's what they do from now on. But I think a lot of people who have a lot of sewing experience and people who really love using commercial patterns, then learn how to take everything they learned from me and then mix it in to what they already love, So, and I think that is what I really want from all of this, is that I want people to have sewing processes that they love. And so I think if there are steps of the process that you're just like, oh, this is icky, I hate this every time, there are alternatives out there. What I've learned is no body is alike, but also no one sews exactly the same either. Somebody's doing this different way because they figured out it helps them in X way. And so anyway, sharing my perspective, I hope, helps people weave little bits of why I do the things that I do into a practice that they already love.
I think so. And we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to get to this final little piece of discussion, which is that you are known for hand sewing, for believing that hand sewing is a really important skill to have. And it sounds like this is really part of this whole having processes and alternatives.
Yes. So, yeah, Yeah. So, I didn't intend to be known for teaching hand sewing. That's not something that was part of people's process. So I didn't realize that the home sewing community was not something I had entered into until, we forgot part of my story. So after I got my MFA, I then went on to sew for Broadway. And so I did that for several years. And then after sewing for celebrities, I ended up moving back to North Carolina and sort of ditching sewing altogether, because I was just kind of like, okay, well, I had done that. And then I became a wedding dressmaker and I did all these things. And so there was a lot of hand sewing in the wedding dresses that I was making, and I was blogging about it online. So I've got a wedding dressmaking blog that has about 300 blog posts where you can watch me make every wedding dress from start to finish and sort of see what my process is. Although in this case, of course, I'm making wedding dresses, which you're probably not going to be doing. And I'm making something for someone else, which my classes are for making clothes for yourself. But in all of that, and when I first started making my first class, I taught basic hand sewing in with skirt skills, not realizing that was something that my students weren't expecting to learn. And so then I got this reputation for being a hand sewing instructor. And then I got asked to teach hand sewing at Camp Workroom Social. And so I'm thinking of doing an online hand sewing class coming up soon. And I think what it is it's my approach to hand sewing is maybe a little different from what you see out there, because I think a lot of teachers who teach hand sewing for garments, they're doing historical hand sewing, or they're trying to teach you to make a whole garment by hand. And that is not something that I'm really even interested in. Like, I love my machine too, y'all. I think you're going to figure out that I'm a lot more loosey-goosey once you get into getting to know me a little better. But I use hand sewing, as a fitting tool. I more than the importance of like a beautiful hem, it's just incorporating hand sewing into your machine sewing practice. So that's something I want people to sort of learn the value of, and just think about little ways that you can add hand sewing in. And so a course I want to try to work on for 2024 is going to be some sort of incorporating hand sewing into your machine sewing class. And then that won't involve fitting so much. So it won't have to be like this one-on-one, big, spiritual journey or whatever we're going to try to go on together. You'll just get to kind of learn how I sew. And then maybe you'll also enjoy, mixing that into your practice that you already love.
And for anybody who wants to follow that class with Brooks Ann, I recommend that you look in the back issue of Threads, and I'll see if there's a link to this online. But she wrote an article for us on how to use a thimble, and choosing a thimble. And this is a very important part of hand sewing. And you will, I think, be very happy when you get your thimble act together. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think everyone who hates using a thimble now is just in the same place that everyone who loves using a thimble now was at one point. Like, we all thought it sucked when we first started. You just have to get through this like inevitable, this feels terrible phase, which is true for a lot of everything that you're going to learn a new skill. Like, there's going to be this inevitable, I'm a beginner, this feels awful, I'm never going to feel good at this is worse, and then you're going to put in some practice, and you're going to put in the time and really, have some skill, some time to practice your skill, and then you're going to reap the benefits from now on. Like, because I've made this block, I don't have to take my measurements anymore. Like, I don't know what size I am, and I find that really freeing and fun. And so we can all do this together if we work together as a sewing community. And I think Threads really helps out with that too. You guys have been around forever, and it helps so many people learn so many different ways to sew. And I think having all perspectives is just what we should all strive for.
Thank you. I agree. I feel like we like to share a lot of different approaches, because everybody learns differently. Everybody prefers different ways of doing things. And when I started talking to you about your way of doing this fitting, and it reminded me of a few things that I have heard of in the past, but I think that it's still not the most common way, because people still tend to start with a commercial pattern, whether it's or whether it's an indie pattern, and, hit the roadblock of the fitting not being right, or maybe the instructions being hard to follow, whatever. Sometimes it's better to just back up, get a really good foundation, and then, as you say, make the hard things first. And then after that, the sailing is a little smoother. We hope.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you ever hit a roadblock still?
Oh, of course. I mean, that's the thing, is it's all the time. Like, I think the difference is in the expectations. So when there is something that's in an envelope and someone has tested it and done all this, you have this expectation that if you follow these steps, it's going to work. And I just think that couldn't possibly be true, because you've never met this designer. They don't know your personal preferences. They don't know what fabric you're working with. They don't know what kind of day you're having. Like it's not a recipe for success. It's a tool that can help you get success, but you have to think of it as a starting point and sort of a tool. But the way that I sew, I fully expect there to be puzzles to solve at every step. And so I'm definitely more of a puzzle solver than, designer. So and then having that expectation that I'm going to have to, that no one has ever made this pattern before. So I know I'm going to have to test it. And so it's not a big deal to say like, oh no, I've got to test this or whatever. But I get to learn exactly how my fabric is going to work. So I'm not going to even cut the collar until I'm sure that the bodice fits, because I haven't even spent any time with this fabric yet. And fabric is something that we have learned. So now I'm getting too nerdy again. So like stitching has been around since before human language, written language. So it's like an ancient thing. But still to this day, human beings are stitching every piece of fabric together. Like even in a factory, a sewing machine, you can't just stick it into a machine and then it comes out sewn. Like it needs the human touch, because every fabric like needs the feel of your hands. And like, that's something that you can't really learn from a book. Like you have to learn it through sewing. You have to learn. The best way to get over not knowing what you're doing is by doing. And so you get to feel for the fabric, you get to learn how things are going to work out. And then by the end, so it's starting a project where you don't know the ending first. And so that's a lot of reasons why, like, I don't necessarily show a bunch of finished garments like, hey, take this skirt class because you can make all these skirts, because you can make any skirt. And I don't want to spoil the ending, because when I started the class, I didn't know what I was going to make either. And so you watch me go through the whole process of like coming up with a design idea and like, oh no, that didn't work. Or, the mistakes are in there. And so I am just fully expecting what other people would call mistakes at every step. I just work so cautiously that I can always fix it. Like it never shows up in the end. Or if it did, then that's just like a wonky part of the story. Like I love like the whole history that's in the clothing. And so I want to see that flaw. Like I kind of want to remember that that's the mark of the maker. Like I know I'm getting really woo. I'm just like, the thing I love about clothes is people, the people who are inside the clothes and the people who make the clothes. And so if I can bring more humanness to the process and less like calculations, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
We have reached our time, and you have done a beautiful job of summing up what you want to do with that line. So I'm going to call time now. And thank you so much, Brooks Ann. There's so much to think about, and so many ways that you've suggested to bring a sense of joy to what you do and a feeling of real satisfaction, no matter how it comes out in the end.
Yes. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
You can find Brooks Ann, as well as information about her sewing classes, her blog, and her newsletter at www.brooksann.com. That's www.brooksann.com.
Thank you to our guest for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send your comments, questions, and suggestions to th@taunton.com. And please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're listening. It helps others find our podcast. Until next time, keep on sewing with threads.